My phone buzzed just as I was finishing a case summary I'd read 6 times already. I didn't expect anything unusual, it was just another long Tuesday buried under legal briefs and stale coffee. But the screen lit up with a FaceTime call from my daughter Ava, who was supposed to be on a spring break trip with my parents and brother. I figured she'd show me some overpriced souvenir or a funny street performer. Something light, something easy. But when I picked up, there was no smile, no sound, just Ava sitting frozen on the edge of a hotel bed, her voice barely a whisper. "Mom, I think I broke my leg." Everything in me dropped. My heart didn't just sink, it collapsed. Ava shifted the camera to show her leg propped up on a pillow. Swollen, deep purple, stretched skin. Misshapen in a way no bruise could explain. It looked like it didn't belong to her body anymore. "I fell yesterday," she said quietly, "on some old steps at a fort we visited. I told them it hurt, but Grandpa said it wasn't that bad. Uncle Nate said I was being dramatic, so we just kept walking." I blinked, stunned. "How long did you walk?" She hesitated. "About 3 hours." 3 hours, on a broken leg. I didn't scream. I didn't panic. But inside something sharp and ancient twisted in my chest, a feeling I hadn't let myself feel since I was her age. When I was the girl who always overreacted, who always got told to toughen up. I swallowed hard, forcing the heat in my throat back down. "Where are they now?" I asked, already reaching for my keys. "They left me at the hotel to rest." "By yourself?" She nodded. I had never hated silence more than I did in that moment. "You stay put. I'm coming." "Mom, you don't have to." "I do. I already booked a flight." Her eyes widened. "But you don't fly." "I know," I said, and I meant it. I hadn't boarded a plane in over a decade. Not since the last time I had a full-blown panic attack on a runway in Atlanta. Even the smell of jet fuel triggers something in me, a kind of suffocating fear that claws its way up from the base of my spine. But this wasn't about my phobia. This was about Ava. "I'm coming," I repeated. "Don't move. Don't even think about standing. I'll be there as soon as I can." She blinked away tears. "Okay." I hung up, grabbed my laptop, and searched for the first one-way flight out. I didn't pack. I didn't even shut down my computer properly. I just ran like I was being chased. And maybe I was. Not by monsters, but by memories. Of every time I begged someone to listen and was told I was too sensitive. Of every time I was ignored when it mattered most. I called my dad. No answer. My mom. Straight to voicemail. Nate, my brother, picked up chipper as always. "Hey sis, what's up?" "You left Ava alone in a hotel with a possibly broken leg." He paused. "She said she was fine." "She can't walk." "She's always been a little sensitive. I mean, it's probably just a bad bruise. The swelling didn't even start till last night." "She told you it hurt, and you kept walking." "She said she didn't want to ruin the day." "She's 15, Nate. It's not her job to advocate for herself." Silence. "You're blowing this out of proportion," he muttered. And just like that, I realized nothing had changed. Not in 20 years, not since I was a girl in hiking boots being told my limp was fake. Not since the day I fainted from heat stroke and was handed half a bottle of warm water and told to get it together. Only this time it wasn't me they ignored, it was my daughter. If you've ever been told you were too much for simply expressing pain, or if someone you love was made to feel invisible, leave a like and stay with me. Because what happened next changed everything. And they never saw it coming. The moment I clicked book flight, my hands started shaking. I hadn't stepped foot in an airport in over 10 years, not since the panic attack that left me curled on the terminal floor gasping for air while people pretended not to stare. The smell of jet fuel, the sterile lights, the overwhelming noise. Just the memory made my chest tighten. But this time, there was no room for fear. No therapy session, no coping technique, just action. I raced home, grabbed my ID and a half-dead phone charger and bolted for the airport. No suitcase, no change of clothes. Just me, the weight in my stomach, and the thought of Ava sitting alone, hurting, wondering if I'd really come. I got to the gate with minutes to spare. No makeup, no plan, just raw urgency. As I waited to board, I kept picturing her leg, the way it ballooned at the joint, the pale look on her face, the way she said, "You don't have to fly, Mom." She knew. She knew what it cost me just to get on this plane, and she still didn't ask. That broke me more than anything. I stepped onto the plane like a soldier marching into enemy territory. Every part of my body screamed to turn around. My fingers dug into the seat as I buckled myself in. I stared straight ahead, gripping the armrests as if they could anchor me to the earth. Turbulence hit 20 minutes in. Not even strong, but it didn't matter. My palms were slick with sweat. My teeth clenched so tightly I gave myself a headache. The woman next to me slept peacefully with a bag of pretzels resting on her chest, unaware I was living out a personal hell. I closed my eyes and breathed. I wasn't doing this because I was brave. I was doing it because I had no other choice. That's what motherhood is. Pushing through the impossible when no one else will. The plane bumped again. My mind, as it always did during moments like this, began to play reruns of my worst memories. Not just flights, but feelings. Of being doubted, laughed at, dismissed. The time I sobbed during turbulence at age 10, and Nate filmed me on our dad's camcorder. He later added cartoon sound effects and played it during Thanksgiving. Everyone laughed. I ran to my room and cried. Mom followed me only to say, "You really need to grow out of this, Jenna." I never did. I just learned to hide it. I learned how to avoid situations that made me vulnerable. I skipped work trips, declined wedding invites, told people I didn't like flying. But the truth was, I didn't like being visible when I was scared. I didn't like giving people another excuse to call me weak. But now I was flying straight into the storm, and I wasn't hiding anymore. I stared out the window, my reflection ghosted in the glass, and thought, they don't get to decide what's too much anymore. Not for me, not for Ava. I remembered what Nate said on the phone, "You're blowing this out of proportion." That phrase, that ugly, tired phrase. The same one they used on me for decades. And I realized I wasn't just flying to rescue Ava. I was flying to break a cycle. As we began to descend, the pressure in my chest didn't ease. But the fear felt different now, less like a trap, and more like a choice. I could let it stop me, or I could let it burn, let it fuel me. I whispered under my breath, "Hold on, baby girl, Mama's coming." And for the first time in a decade, I felt powerful, terrified, yes, but also undeniably, irrevocably determined. I didn't fly because I wasn't scared. I flew because I finally realized fear doesn't get to win when love is on the line. If you've ever had to face something that terrified you to protect someone you love, share your story in the comments. You never know who might need to hear that courage doesn't mean being fearless. It just means going anyway. I wasn't always this strong. In fact, there was a time in my life when I believed the worst thing I could be was too emotional. Growing up in a household like mine, weakness wasn't allowed. Feelings were liabilities. If you cried, you were mocked. If you hesitated, you were shamed. And if you ever dared to say, "This hurts," you were labeled for life. In my case, the label was drama queen. It started early. I was 8 the first time I fainted during a hike. I'd been walking too long in the Georgia sun, barely drinking water. My legs gave out on a slope and I hit the ground hard. My mother rushed over not with concern, but with a sigh and a bottle of lukewarm water. "You can't keep doing this, Jenna," she said. "You're embarrassing yourself." From that day on, my body became the punchline to family jokes. Nate, my older brother, 3 years louder and endlessly adored, made it his mission to document every meltdown I had. Whether it was a nosebleed, an allergic reaction, or motion sickness on a school bus, he was there recording, laughing, sharing. When I was 10, I had a panic attack on a flight to Denver. Bad turbulence. I cried and held onto the tray table like it was my last lifeline. Nate filmed the whole thing. Years later at a family BBQ, he added cartoon screams and played it for everyone like it was an SNL sketch. People were crying, laughing. I locked myself in the bathroom for the rest of the night. No one knocked, no one checked. I learned quickly that being vulnerable in my family meant giving them ammunition. So I stopped talking. I stopped reacting. I stopped asking for help. But silence didn't make me safer, it just made me invisible. At school, I was the quiet girl with the polite smile. At home, I was the background noise. Nate could sprain a pinky during football and be carried home like a hero. I could pull a muscle and be told to walk it off. He was resilient. I was too much. What hurt most wasn't that they ignored my pain. It was that they never believed it was real in the first place. My mother called it tough love, but it never felt like love. Just dismissal disguised as discipline. Even when I graduated top of my class and got into law school, the comments didn't stop. "Isn't that kind of intense for someone like you?" Mom asked. "I just don't see you in courtrooms. You're more sensitive." I smiled and said nothing, but inside something hardened. Because what they didn't know was that I didn't choose criminal investigation to prove them wrong. I chose it because I craved truth, undeniable, unshakable truth. The kind that didn't need anyone's permission to exist. The courtroom became my sanctuary. Logic became my shield. Evidence my voice. Still, even with all my credentials, even with a career built on hard facts, they treated me like the same little girl who cried on airplanes. And now here we were again. Only this time it wasn't me in the hotel room, hurting, dismissed, told to stay quiet. It was my daughter. And I could feel history trying to repeat itself, pressing down on us like a hand over the mouth. But I wasn't the girl I used to be. And Ava sure as hell wasn't going to grow up thinking her pain needed to be quiet to be valid. If you've ever been labeled for feeling too much or made to feel ashamed for your emotions, tell me below. Let's rewrite the story that says silence is strength. Because maybe strength looks a lot more like being loud when it matters. The first time I noticed Ava was becoming like me. It wasn't in the way she spoke, it was in the way she didn't. She was quiet in the same rooms that used to suffocate me. Careful not to interrupt, careful not to seem difficult, careful not to ask for too much. And in my family, even asking for a little was already too much. It hit me hardest one Thanksgiving. She and her cousin Lily had both spilled juice on the carpet. Same moment, same mess. But when my mother walked in, she didn't hesitate. She turned to Ava and snapped, "You need to be more aware of your surroundings, young lady." Then to Lily, "Sweetie, accidents happen." Ava didn't protest. She just looked at me, eyes wide, mouth shut, waiting. And I stayed silent. Because I had told myself, pick your battles, Jenna, it's not worth it. But it was. It always was. Because in that moment, I passed down more than my DNA, I passed down my silence. I had worked so hard to build a different world for her. She had noise-canceling headphones for when she felt overwhelmed, a safe word for when she needed space, a calendar on the fridge that listed her therapy sessions like piano recitals, nothing to hide, everything to honor. But no matter how much I tried to protect her inside our home, the moment she stepped into my parents' orbit, the air changed. They didn't say much, that was their signature. Not open criticism, just tone. Eyebrow raises, tight-lipped smiles, quiet comparison. Lily's always been so outgoing. Ava's more sensitive. They didn't need to say more. I knew that playbook by heart. So when Ava asked to go on the spring break trip with them and Nate's family, I hesitated. Not because I didn't want her to bond with her cousins. Not because I didn't trust Ava, but because I didn't trust what they'd see when they looked at her. Would they see her brilliant curiosity, her kindness, her love for nature, documentaries, and sketching cities from memory? Or would they just see a younger version of me? Would they hear her say, "My knee hurts," and respond with, "Stop whining"? Would they see her cry and call it drama? Would they let history happen all over again? But Ava wanted to go. She begged. She promised to call every night. And when my mother said, "Don't worry, Jenna will take good care of her," something inside me cracked. Because I remembered that same line when I was 12 and had to stay with them for a summer. The summer I came back 10 pounds lighter, 3 shades quieter. Still, I said yes. I packed her bag myself, added her allergy meds, backup charger, Band-Aid, sunscreen, packed all the things I could control because I couldn't pack protection from gaslighting. And then they asked, "Can you help cover Lily and Ben's plane tickets? Since they'll be helping with Ava." Helping. I wanted to scream. She doesn't need help, she needs kindness. But I said yes again. I wired the money. I kissed her goodbye in the driveway. And I waved, smiling, just enough to keep her from seeing the dread pooling in my stomach. Because the truth is, I didn't just send her on a trip, I sent her into the jaws of my past, hoping they wouldn't recognize the scent. If you've ever felt that gut instinct, that quiet voice saying, "Don't do this," and ignored it out of hope, tell me. Let's be honest about the ways we convince ourselves people change even when they never did. Because the hardest lesson I ever learned was this. Some people don't deserve another chance with your child just because they had one with you. When Ava opened the hotel room door, something inside me cracked. Not because of the bruises or the swelling, although they were bad. Not even because she was still in pajamas, hair unbrushed, leaning against the doorframe like it was the only thing holding her up. It was what she said. "You actually came. Not thank you, not help me, not even finally. Just surprise, like she hadn't believed I would. Like a piece of her had quietly prepared to be left alone again. And that's when I knew this wasn't just a broken leg. This was a fracture in trust. I stepped into the room trying to hold myself together. My voice came out hoarse, gentler than I intended. "Of course I came. You're the only person on this planet who could get me on a plane. She managed a tiny laugh, and I added, please don't ever make me do that again. We both smiled a little, cracked, a little tired, but real. Then I saw her leg. I had to bite my tongue to keep from gasping. The swelling was worse than it looked on FaceTime. It was angry and red and swollen in places that legs just shouldn't be. I knelt beside her and whispered, okay, time to get this looked at before it starts glowing or something. It took us 15 minutes to get her shoe on, and even then, only one. The other stayed off because her foot had ballooned. She made a joke about it looking like a watermelon. I didn't laugh. We got in a cab and I held her hand the whole way. At one point, I asked without really thinking, so how exactly did this happen again? You said it was the stairs. There was a pause. Then Ava said it wasn't really a fall. I looked over. She wasn't meeting my eyes. Her fingers fidgeted with the hem of her shirt. He pushed me, she finally said. Ben, we were taking pictures. He thought it'd be funny. I froze. She continued, he didn't mean to. I don't think. He does that kind of stuff all the time. Just messing around, I guess. I took a deep breath, and they saw it. She nodded. Grandma said I was being dramatic. Uncle Nate told me to stop crying. I was scaring the other tourists. Grandpa asked if maybe I twisted it before the trip and just didn't notice. I didn't speak. I couldn't. Because rage doesn't always look like screaming. Sometimes it looks like a jaw locked so tight your teeth ache. Like your fingers digging into your own leg just to feel grounded. Then Ava said something that shattered me again. I didn't tell you that on the call because I thought it would go away. And I didn't want to get Ben in trouble. I turned to face her fully. Ava, I said someone pushed you down a flight of stone stairs. Your leg is swelling like it's about to burst. That's not something you hide to protect someone. She looked away. Especially not family, I added. Especially family. She nodded slowly, like someone finally realizing a truth she had been gaslit away from seeing. When we got to the ER, she was quiet but brave. I told her when they ask what happened, tell them the truth. No edits, no softening. She squeezed my hand and said, okay. If you've ever had to teach someone you love that protecting others at your own expense isn't noble, it's damaging. Tell me below, because silence is where pain festers. And today, Ava was learning what I didn't until I was 35. You don't owe anyone your silence, especially not when you've been hurt. And if this part of the story hit something in you, maybe leave a comment, or a like, or subscribe. Because we're not just telling stories here. We're breaking cycles, one truth at a time. The emergency room was colder than I remembered. They wheeled Ava in after triage, and for a brief moment I felt like I could breathe again. The nurse asked all the usual questions, pain level, allergies, prior injuries. Ava answered quietly, calmly, like someone reporting the weather instead of pain. Then came the question I was waiting for. How did this happen? Ava glanced at me. I didn't say a word. She turned back to the nurse and said in the most even tone I've ever heard from her, my cousin pushed me as a joke. I fell down the stairs. No tears, no embellishment, no softening. Just truth. The nurse's expression didn't change, but her pen started moving faster. I watched her hand scribble notes as if something urgent had just clicked into place. And maybe it had. 20 minutes later, the X-ray confirmed it, non-displaced tibia fracture. Still in alignment, barely, but definitely broken. The doctor, a tall man with kind eyes, frowned as he read the chart. You're lucky it didn't shift, he said. If she'd walked on this much longer... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. My mind filled in the blanks, surgery complications, long-term damage. I stared at Ava's leg, then at her face, still pale, still quiet, but stronger now. And I realized she wasn't just enduring. She was watching me, waiting to see how I'd respond. And I wasn't going to fail her. I took a slow breath and said, tell me everything, from the beginning, the full timeline. So she did. She told me that after the fall, she'd begged to go to the hospital, but it was walking tour day, and the tickets were non-refundable. Grandma told her to ice it later. Grandpa said it was probably a bruise. Uncle Nate shrugged and said she could rest after the tour. So they made her walk, for 3 full hours, on a broken leg. The next morning, when she asked again to go to the ER, they said they had a winery tour booked, and someone needed to stay back and watch the kids anyway. So they left her at the hotel alone with a bag of ice, and her own fear. I sat there gripping the edge of my chair, barely holding back the scream building in my throat. Then she said, they told me I was acting like you. I blinked, like me. She nodded. Grandma said, you're just like your mother, always making something out of nothing. And in that instant, I was 10 again, crying in the back of the minivan after throwing up from motion sickness, only to hear my mom whisper, "Here we go again." I was 12, limping after a twisted ankle, and being told I had a flair for theatrics. I was 15, hiding migraines in the school bathroom so I wouldn't get called fragile at dinner. They had never seen me, and now they refused to see her. This wasn't about overreaction. This was about a generational erasure of pain, a script handed down from parent to child laced with shame and denial. But it ended here, right now. I kissed Ava's forehead and whispered, "You never have to be small to make them comfortable." Then I stepped into the hallway and called my father. He answered on the third ring. "Is she okay?" he asked, not with concern but with fear of consequences. "She has a fractured tibia," I said flatly. "A doctor confirmed it." There was a pause. "Well, it didn't look that bad." Ben pushed her. "Come on, that's not fair. He was just playing around. You saw it. You all saw it. She didn't trip. She was shoved. And then you made her walk on it." He didn't reply. "I'm pressing charges," I said. "Jenna, be reasonable." "No," I cut in. "I'm being a mother." And then I hung up. If you've ever had to choose between keeping the peace and telling the truth, between being the good daughter and the right one, say it with me below. Because silence doesn't protect anyone. It only teaches the next generation how to stay quiet. And maybe that's why I'm still telling this story. Not just for me, but for Ava. For every daughter who finally learns she's allowed to speak. Back at the hotel, Ava sat propped up in bed with a fresh cast and a prescription for pain meds tucked neatly in her backpack. Her face was still pale, her body clearly exhausted, but her spirit, it was steady, almost defiant. She looked at me as I walked in, her eyes searching mine. "That was Grandpa on the phone, wasn't it?" I nodded. He said I was being irrational. She blinked once, and then a small, wry smile curled at the corner of her lips. "Sounds about right." It made her laugh, that dry, exhausted laugh of someone who's too tired to cry, but this time it wasn't hollow, it was real. And that's when I reached for my phone, opened the Notes app, and typed in bold letters, "Request legal consultation. Medical neglect. Child endangerment." I didn't do it out of rage, I did it out of clarity. Because this wasn't just a story of bad parenting or one bad day. This was a pattern, a legacy of emotional negligence that had gone unchecked for generations. And I refused to let Ava carry it into hers. I'd spent most of my life explaining away the people who hurt me. They meant well. They didn't know better. It was just how they were raised. But none of those things changed what had happened. None of those things changed the fact that they watched my daughter get pushed down a flight of stairs and did nothing. A few hours later, while Ava dozed off, I reviewed my case notes like I would for any client. But this wasn't a case file. This was personal. I built the timeline, matched it with the ER records, pulled Ava's call history, FaceTime logs. I saved the x-ray, the doctor's note, even the pain scale chart they made her fill out. I sent it all to my lawyer. 3 days later, we got the footage. A tourist had captured the exact moment. Ava, smiling with her phone pointed at the skyline, and then Ben charges behind her, shoves her arm, and she stumbles forward, disappearing out of frame. What followed was what turned my stomach. In the background, you could clearly see Nate, my mother, my father, standing there. No one rushed, no one dropped their bags, no one even flinched. It was as if Ava didn't exist, as if her pain was something inconvenient they could ignore into silence. I forwarded the footage to my attorney. She didn't respond with a paragraph or phone call, just a thumbs up and a short message, "We've got them." And just like that, I knew. I knew there was no going back. I knew court would be hell, that the family would implode, that people would say I was bitter, vindictive, dramatic. But they'd said those things my whole life, and I was still standing. So I booked another flight this time for both of us. And when I told Ava, she looked at me across the kitchen and whispered, "You're flying again." I nodded. Looks like it. Willingly. I paused. Not really, but I'm not frozen anymore either. Because once you walk through a fire you've avoided for years and survive, something rewires. Something ancient inside you remembers you're allowed to fight back. If you've ever been told you were too dramatic, for standing up, too emotional, for calling out harm, you're not alone. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let it be known. Because sometimes the most powerful revolution begins when one woman simply refuses to be quiet anymore. And if you're still here with me, thank you. Like, comment, subscribe if this story speaks your truth. We're not done yet. But we're no longer afraid. The fallout didn't start in the courtroom, it started at my front door. Nate was the first to show up. He didn't knock gently. He pounded like someone who still believed he had the right to be heard just because he was the loudest voice in the room. When I opened the door, he didn't even say hello. "You're really doing this," he barked, stepping onto my porch like he owned it. I didn't flinch. Yes. "You're going to destroy us, Jenna." I stared at him. "You should have thought of that before you left my daughter with a broken leg in a hotel room." He scoffed. "It was an accident." No, Ben pushing her was an accident. But the rest? The denial, the dismissal, the hours you made her walk, the lies you fed her to keep her quiet, that was a choice. He had no response to that. Only a clenched jaw and the same red face he'd get whenever someone dared to challenge him growing up. The kind that used to intimidate me, not anymore. He stormed off after muttering something about lawyers ruining families. But I wasn't the one who broke this family. I was just the first to admit it was already broken. Next came my parents. And when they arrived together, always a sign they were planning a unified front. My mother held a casserole dish like that, somehow balanced the scales. My father stood behind her arms, crossed jaw tight. "We need to talk," she said. Not can we not. Is this a good time? Just the assumption that her presence was a privilege. I stepped aside wordless and let them in. Mom set the casserole on the counter like it was some offering to appease the gods. Then she turned and went straight for the guilt. "We're your parents, Jenna. You're going to take us to court over this." My voice was calm, steady, yes. "What will people say?" "They'll say the truth." My father cleared his throat. "If we drop it now, we can all move on. This doesn't have to go public. You're making this bigger than it needs to be." I looked him straight in the eye. "You made her walk for 3 hours on a broken leg. You saw her fall. You saw her pain. And you laughed at her discomfort. I'm not letting that go." They went silent for a moment, realizing maybe for the first time that I wasn't bluffing. I wasn't just playing hurt feelings. I was building a case, a real one, and it was going to hurt. They left without taking the casserole. And that's when the calls started. Aunt Rachel, Cousin Kyle, Uncle Thomas people who hadn't texted me since Obama's first term suddenly flooding my inbox with variations of the same message. "Your mom's a mess. This could ruin Nate's job. Why can't you just move on? Don't tear the family apart over a misunderstanding." So I told them the truth, every single one of them. I shared the footage, the x-rays, the ER report, the transcript of Ava's statement. And you know what happened? By the fourth call, something shifted. I started hearing different responses. I had no idea. Wait, she was actually that hurt. They left her alone. Suddenly, I wasn't the villain anymore. I was the whistleblower. And even if none of them said it aloud, I could feel it. They knew. They knew this wasn't just about Ava's leg. This was about all the silent injuries we let fester in the name of family. I wasn't just suing for justice. I was suing for every girl who was told her pain was performance. Every child who walked on a wound because no one believed them. And for the first time in my life, I didn't care what people thought of me. Because the only opinion that mattered now was Ava's. If you've ever had to stand alone in a room full of relatives and say, "What you did wasn't okay, you know how much that costs," tell me about it below. Share your truth. And if you're still reading this, still following this journey, thank you. Like, comment, subscribe. Because sometimes telling the story is the only way to heal from it. The courtroom wasn't like in the movies. There were no gasps, no slamming gavels, no dramatic objection moments. Just the low hum of paperwork, murmured legal jargon, and the rhythmic tapping of a judge's pen against the desk. But don't let the quiet fool you. What happened in that room changed everything. The judge didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. After reviewing the evidence, the medical reports, the video, the statements, he spoke with a clarity that cut deeper than any outburst. Child endangerment, medical neglect, failure to report injury. 3 separate charges, all entered into the official record. There was no jail time, but the penalties weren't light. My parents and Nate were hit with fines so steep they choked when they saw the numbers. Fines that didn't just sting, they crushed. The kind that stripped you of comfort, of appearances, of financial leverage. And for Nate, the fallout was worse. Because it turns out schools aren't eager to keep PE teachers with a child endangerment charge attached to their name. His contract was suspended within a week, terminated after 2. By the end of the month, he'd lost not just his job, but his status, the thing he valued more than anything. My parents. They sold their house within 6 weeks. Moved into a cramped rental in a far less glamorous neighborhood. My mother called it temporary, but a cousin let it slip. They were already asking for rent help, from everyone, except me. They didn't bother, because they knew the answer. The side account I'd been quietly sending grocery money into for years closed. The birthday gifts I used to send even when I wasn't invited to parties stopped. The calls I used to take out of obligation, I let them ring now. No grand declaration, no dramatic final speech, just silence. The kind that says you no longer have access to me. And for the first time, that silence didn't feel like punishment. It felt like peace. Back at home, Ava was healing. Her leg had been placed in a sturdy cast, weekly check-ins, gentle PT exercises. But more than her bones, I watched her spirit begin to settle. She got quieter, but not in a shutdown kind of way. More like someone who had finally learned she didn't need to explain herself to be taken seriously. We were folding laundry one evening when she looked at me and said something I'll never forget. I think I would have let it go. I paused, not quite sure how to respond. But I'm glad you didn't, she added softly, holding up a sock like it was armor. I nodded, throat tight. You should never have to scream just to be believed. And she smiled a full, quiet, confident smile. The kind I never had at her age. The kind I used to fake for cameras, for guests, for my parents. But hers was real. Because she knew now. She knew her pain wasn't too much. Her voice wasn't inconvenient. And her story deserved to be told even if it made other people uncomfortable. Have you ever felt the weight of choosing silence to keep others comfortable? Have you ever looked back and realized your peace came the moment you chose discomfort instead? Drop your truth below. Because sometimes healing doesn't look like closure. It looks like cutting ties. Like, comment, subscribe. This isn't just one story. It's 1,000 untold stories. And you never know who needs to hear yours next. 3 weeks after the verdict, something unexpected happened. Ava handed me her phone during our usual Saturday morning breakfast. No words, just a subtle gesture like passing the salt. But her expression told me everything. This wasn't just a text. It was a moment. On the screen was a message from Ben. Hey, I know this is late, but I'm really sorry. I shouldn't have pushed you even as a joke. I was trying to be funny, but it was stupid. I feel terrible. I hope your leg is healing okay. I read it twice, then again. Not because it was poetic or profound, it wasn't, but because it was unexpected, uncoached, honest in a way kids rarely are when they've been shielded their whole lives from accountability. Ava didn't cry. She didn't reply. She just looked out the window for a moment, then back at me. You believe him? I asked gently. She gave a small shrug. Yeah, I think so. I don't think anyone told him to send that. And I believed her, because her voice didn't wobble. Her eyes didn't flicker with doubt. She was grounded in her own truth, a strength I didn't find until I was well into adulthood. The moment passed quietly like a pebble tossed into a still lake. No splash, just ripples. But it meant something. Maybe not to Nate or my parents or the neighbors still whispering about the lawsuit. But to Ava, to me, it was everything. Because this wasn't about revenge. It never was. It was about setting a line so clear, so undeniable, that no one would ever again be confused about what we'd accept and what we wouldn't. I once thought cutting people off made me heartless. Now I know boundaries don't make you cruel, they make you free. Still, I'm not gonna lie, it was hard. The silence after everything was louder than any screaming match. Family members stopped calling. Birthday invites dried up. A few relatives even unfollowed me online, like that would sting more than the decades they stood silent while I was erased from every meaningful conversation. But I didn't chase them. I didn't defend myself or post vague quotes about healing or setting yourself free. I didn't need to. Because I had something better. I had peace. And more than that, I had Ava. She walked without crutches now. No limp, no hesitation. But there was something else, a new kind of posture, a quiet confidence. The way she stood taller, the way she held her chin up at family dinners she no longer had to attend, the way she smiled like her voice wasn't a burden anymore but a birthright. And I knew I hadn't just rescued her from that hotel room. I had rescued her from a lifetime of being told to stay quiet. One night as we washed dishes together, Ava asked me, "Do you think we'll ever talk to them again?" I paused, not because I didn't have an answer, but because for the first time I wasn't afraid of it. Maybe, I said. But it'll be on your terms, not theirs. She nodded, thought about it, then said, I don't miss them as much as I thought I would. I smiled. That's what healing feels like. If you've ever found yourself mourning the family you hoped you had instead of the one you actually did, you're not alone. Tell me in the comments. Let someone else see your reflection in their own ache. And if this story speaks to you, don't just scroll by. Like, subscribe, stay a while. Because breaking the cycle starts with one person who refuses to pass it on. And maybe today, that person is you. The hardest part wasn't the court. It wasn't facing Nate's fury on my front porch. It wasn't watching my mother's eyes turn cold when I said the word neglect. It wasn't even the silence that followed the ghosting from cousins, the gossip at community events, the invitations that stopped arriving. The hardest part was knowing I could have stopped this sooner. That ache haunted me more than any family backlash ever could, because I saw the signs long before Ava left for that trip. The hesitation in her voice when she told me about it. The too eager assurances from my parents that they'd take good care of her. The subtle guilt trip when Nate asked me to pay for his kids' flights framed like they were doing me a favor. I had a gut feeling and I ignored it. And when we ignore our gut long enough, we end up calling betrayal bad luck. But Ava never said those words aloud. She didn't blame me, not once. Instead, she just adapted. She healed, quietly, gracefully, and without needing to explain herself to anyone. Her cast came off. Physical therapy wrapped up. She started drawing again, filling sketchbooks with soft pencil outlines of cities she wanted to visit. Places far from here. One night while we were folding laundry, she looked up and said, I don't think they'll ever really understand. I paused, waiting. But that's okay, because I don't need them to. And there it was, that sentence. A full circle moment from the girl who once apologized for needing help to the young woman who finally saw her worth without waiting for permission. I nodded. They don't have to understand. They just don't get to keep hurting you. That night, as I was closing my laptop, I noticed something strange. A notification from an unfamiliar number. I hope you're happy. You've ruined everything. We're family, Jenna. No name. But I didn't need one. I knew the tone. I knew the guilt tactic. I'd grown up under it. I stared at the message for a long time. Then I deleted it. Not because I was afraid, but because I no longer accepted shame from people who only call when they've lost power over me. Later that week, Ava got a text too. This one from her cousin Lily. I don't really know what happened, but I miss you. Ava showed it to me without saying anything. And I watched her think, not panic, not rush to respond, just pause, breathe, and say I might text her back someday. But not now. That was her boundary. Quiet, firm, respected. We'd come a long way. The noise from the family faded with time. A few relatives reached out to say they were sorry to hear what happened. Some asked for details. Others danced around the subject like it was radioactive. But we didn't owe them closure. We owed each other peace. If you've ever felt like the black sheep for protecting your child, if you've ever been told don't make a scene when the real scene was the silence you were forced to endure, I see you. Drop a comment, share a moment, lend your voice to someone else still learning how to use theirs. And if you're still here, thank you. Leave a comment or hit subscribe. Not because I need the numbers, but because somewhere someone else is one decision away from breaking free. And your story might be the push they've been waiting for. It's strange what people consider forgivable. When the dust settled after the court dates, the fines, the social fallout, I started noticing a new tone in the messages that trickled in. Not from Nate, not from my parents, but from those who'd watched quietly from the sidelines while everything unfolded. They called it a family misunderstanding. They said things like, "It's a shame this couldn't be resolved privately," or "Kids get hurt sometimes. You didn't have to take it that far." That far. As if filing legal action to protect my daughter from neglect was a publicity stunt. As if 3 hours of walking on a broken leg was just a parenting hiccup. As if the word family was supposed to eclipse everything else. But the truth is, family was never supposed to be a shield for cruelty. The more people said I'd overreacted, the more I realized how deeply normalized silence had become. How many generations had been raised to prioritize keeping the peace over actually having peace. Ava and I had found a new rhythm now. She was back in school. She carried herself with quiet strength. She still didn't talk much about what happened, not because she wasn't allowed to, but because she didn't need to. Some wounds don't have to be reopened to prove they were real. One evening I found her sitting in the living room with a blank piece of paper in front of her. No sketch, no doodle. Just a pencil in her hand and a look on her face I hadn't seen since that hotel room. "What's on your mind?" I asked. She looked up and said, "I was thinking about what would have happened if I hadn't called you." The silence after that was heavy. Not painful, but thick with realization. "Do you think they would have ever taken me to the hospital?" I didn't answer right away, because I didn't want to lie, and the truth was hard. "No," I said finally, "I don't think they would have." She nodded slowly like she already knew, like she just needed someone else to confirm that her pain wasn't imagined. And that's when I realized something even harder. It wasn't the fall that hurt her the most. It was the moment she realized she was disposable to people she thought would protect her. And if I'm being honest, that's what scarred me too. Because deep down, I had still held on to this childish hope that my parents would change, that Nate would grow up, that one day they'd see me not the sensitive version of me they had sculpted from years of projection, but the real me, the mother, the fighter, the one who finally stood up. But they didn't, and maybe they never will. The last time I spoke to my mother, she said we all make mistakes. But taking us to court, that was extreme. I stared at her through the screen, her hair perfectly curled, makeup done. Like appearance could still make up for truth. So I said letting a child suffer isn't a mistake. It's a choice. She blinked, taken aback, but I didn't give her time to recover. I ended the call. I haven't spoken to her since. If you've ever been told your boundaries were extreme, if you've ever been called difficult for doing what's right instead of what's comfortable, I want you to hear this. You are not the problem. Drop a comment if you've been there. Let others see themselves in your courage. And if this resonates with you, take a second to like, to subscribe, to stay connected. Not because it changes what happened, but because it might just change what happens next. We don't just break the silence for ourselves. We break it so others can hear their own voice too. The day Ava's cast came off, I cried, but not for the reason you think. It wasn't relief, although that was part of it. It wasn't joy, though. Seeing her walk again without wincing nearly undid me. It was grief. Grief for everything we both lost in those few weeks. Because even though the bone had healed and the bruises faded and Ava's gait was steady again, there were wounds that didn't show up on an X-ray. I saw it in the way she flinched when people raised their voices in the hallway at school. The way she hesitated before speaking up in class. The way she looked at me when I left for work as if double-checking that I would in fact come back. Trauma is rarely loud. Sometimes it's just a girl who used to sing in the shower, going quiet. But it's also in her strength. In the way she now asks, "Can I say something?" and doesn't wait for permission. In the way she speaks up when something feels off. In the way she no longer tolerates being dismissed. We were folding towels together one evening, just a small, ordinary moment. But it meant the world to me. She looked up and said, "I don't know if I'll ever forgive them." It wasn't bitter, it wasn't angry, it was honest. And I didn't try to correct her. I didn't say you should. I didn't preach about forgiveness being for her, not them. 'Cause sometimes forgiveness is not the goal. Peace is. I said that's okay. She nodded, then added, "But I'm glad you didn't forgive them for me." And I nearly lost it. Right there with a bath towel in one hand and a knot in my throat. That was the moment I realized the generational chain had officially broken. I hadn't just protected my daughter. I'd shown her what protection looked like. That love wasn't silence. That loyalty didn't mean allowing harm. That being family didn't give anyone a pass to treat you like you don't matter. And now Ava knew it too. We didn't talk much about the case after that. It was closed, literally and figuratively. But what remained was something unspoken and powerful, a mutual trust built not on words but on action. One afternoon while we were grocery shopping, Ava ran into one of Nate's friends from school, a girl who used to come to family barbecues. She smiled politely and the girl said, "I heard what happened. That must have been awful." Ava simply replied it was, "But I'm okay now." Not a performance, not a plea, just truth. I watched from a few feet away, letting her handle it. Because she didn't need me to speak for her anymore. She'd found her voice and she wasn't afraid to use it. If you've ever wondered if speaking up will make things worse, let me offer you this. It might for a while, but what it makes better lasts so much longer. Drop your thoughts below. Your story matters. And if this chapter resonated with you, stay with us. Like, subscribe, share it with someone who needs it, because the work of healing may be invisible, but the power it gives back, that's the legacy. We were sitting in the backyard when Ava showed me the last message. The sun was setting, throwing long golden streaks across the grass. Our dog lay sprawled at Ava's feet, twitching in his sleep. There was no drama, no build-up, just Ava quietly pulling her phone out, opening a message and turning the screen toward me. It was from Ben. "I know it's late, but I really am sorry. I didn't mean to hurt you. I just thought it'd be funny like always. I was stupid. You didn't deserve that. I hope you're okay now." I read it once, then again. Then I looked at Ava. She didn't speak, she just waited. "Do you believe him?" I asked, repeating the question I had once asked when the first message came through weeks earlier. This time she didn't shrug. She said, "Yeah, I think so." Her voice was calm, measured, but certain. "I don't think anyone told him to send it. I don't even think he understands how bad it really was. But he meant that. And I believed her. Not because I was ready to forgive Nate, or my parents, or pretend that everything that happened was somehow repairable, but because Ava had reached a place of peace with one small piece of it, and that mattered. Because forgiveness, when it comes from clarity instead of pressure, is power. Ben was 12, old enough to know better, but young enough to still be learning. What mattered to me wasn't whether he ever faced punishment. It was that someone in that family had shown a glimmer of accountability. And more importantly, that Ava saw what accountability looked like. That she recognized it not as an obligation, but as a genuine offering. She didn't text him back, not right away. Not because she was angry, but because she didn't owe him a response. Sometimes acknowledgement is enough. Later that night, as we cleaned up dinner dishes, Ava asked, "Do you think Ben changed?" I thought for a second. Maybe, I said. Or maybe he's just starting to. She nodded, then looked me in the eye. "I think I'm starting to change too." That stopped me cold. I set the dish down. "How do you mean?" She dried her hands with a towel, then said, "I used to think that being strong meant not letting things bother me, or forgiving people just to move on. But now I think maybe it's just about knowing when to walk away and not needing to explain it." I smiled. Sounds like something a wise young woman would say. She grinned. "Well, I have a pretty good teacher." That one landed. Deep. The kind of moment you lock away for later when the world feels messy again and you need to remember why you stood up in the first place. We didn't talk about the case again after that. Not because it didn't matter, but because it was no longer the center of her story. She had taken her pain, faced it, named it, and released it on her terms. And there's nothing more powerful than that. Have you ever been offered an apology that didn't fix everything, but still mattered more than you expected? Have you ever seen someone grow in front of your eyes, not because they were told to, but because they chose to? If so, drop your story in the comments. Let someone else recognize themselves in your courage. And if this journey has stayed with you till now, take a breath with me. Then click like, hit subscribe. Share it with someone who needs to know that healing is possible even when the hurt came from family. Because change doesn't always look loud. Sometimes it's just a quiet message, at the right time, from the right person, and the choice to say, "I believe you. I never blocked their numbers." Not my parents, not Nate, not the cousins who went silent, not the aunts and uncles who defended both sides. I didn't need to. Because I wasn't waiting anymore. No more waiting for apologies that wouldn't come. No more waiting for recognition. No more waiting for the version of them I'd imagined since I was a child. The version that would finally say, "We're sorry. We were wrong. We see you now." I stopped replying. I stopped hoping, and the silence that followed, it was the most peaceful sound I'd ever known. It wasn't bitter. It wasn't revenge. It was a choice, a boundary, a reclamation. Ava and I moved forward. We didn't forget, but we stopped letting the past pilot the present. Our days became quieter, simpler, breakfast without the tension, holidays without the guilt, laughter without the underlying dread of what will they say this time. One weekend we went on a short trip, just the two of us. I drove. No flights. Just a few hours down the coast to a little beachside town with salt in the air and old bookstores tucked between coffee shops. We walked, we talked, we rested. We existed freely. And on our last night there, sitting on a blanket watching the tide roll in, Ava leaned her head on my shoulder and said, "I don't think I'll ever forget what happened, but I don't want it to define me either." I nodded. "It won't, not unless you let it." She looked up at the stars for a long moment, then whispered, "I know. Because you didn't let it define you either." There it was. Full circle. Not just healing, but awareness. Not just surviving, but clarity. She saw me. Not as a mother who flew to save her. Not as a woman who took the family to court. But as someone who chose herself. Over the noise. Over the guilt. Over the illusion of loyalty. That was the legacy I wanted to pass on. Not endurance, but discernment. Ava didn't need to carry every weight to prove her strength. She didn't need to mend broken bridges just to keep people comfortable. She didn't need to shrink her truth to fit someone else's denial. And neither do you. If you're still here, if you followed this story through every ache, every truth, every boundary that finally held thank you, you're not alone. You never were. Maybe your family told you that your voice didn't matter, that your pain was too much, that standing up meant tearing things apart. But I'm here to tell you, you are allowed to protect your peace. You are allowed to rewrite the rules. You are allowed to walk away. And if you believe in choosing healing over performance, truth over appearances, self-worth over guilt, then click like, leave a comment, subscribe. Not for me, but for the next person who's still sitting in silence, wondering if their story is worth telling. Let's show them it is. Let's keep breaking the cycle, together. Sometimes silence is not the absence of love, it's the presence of clarity. I used to think that family meant forever, that blood demanded loyalty, that my role was to endure, to bend, to stay silent for the sake of peace. But peace built on erasure is not peace. It's performance. It's survival at the cost of self. What happened to Ava and me, it shattered more than just trust. It shattered the illusion that I had to keep proving myself worthy of love, in rooms that only ever saw me as disposable. But here's the truth I live by now. Family is not who demands the most from you. It's who protects the parts of you others tried to break. I found a new rhythm, a new voice, a new life. Not louder, not showier, but real, quietly powerful. I don't share this story to villainize. I share it because someone somewhere is still wondering, is it okay to walk away? Is it selfish to say no? Is it wrong to protect my child, even if it means losing everything I thought I knew? My answer, no, it's not wrong, it's brave, and you're not alone. So if you've ever had to start over, if you've ever lost the people who should have loved you the most and still chose to live with softness, with boundaries, with strength, I see you. I honor your courage, and I hope you never forget your peace is not up for negotiation. Thank you for listening to my story. If it moved you even just a little, share your truth in the comments. Let someone else know they're not alone. And if you're ready to keep reclaiming your story, subscribe. Stay. We're building something here, something real. Together, one voice at a time.